I had never imagined that one simple decision would unravel everything. If only I had known what would come next, maybe I could have stopped it before the damage was done. My name is Evelyn Johnson, and I'm 74 years old. I've lived a long life, much of it in the quiet peace of our little house in the suburbs of Wisconsin. After my husband Richard and I retired, we settled into a rhythm, a peaceful life where we spent mornings together on the porch, drinking coffee and reminiscing about the good old days. But things weren't always easy. Richard and I had been married for 50 years. We had our ups and downs, but I always thought we were solid. We raised 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, and now they were all grown, scattered across the country with their own families. Richard and I took comfort in knowing that, at the end of the day, we had each other. We were comfortable, even if things were simpler than they once were. But that all changed when Richard invited his old friend, Jim, to stay with us for a while. I remember the day clearly. Richard came home from his golf game, excitement in his voice as he told me, "Eve, Jim's going through a rough patch. He needs somewhere to stay for a bit, just until he gets back on his feet." "What do you think?" Froze. Jim was always a bit much. He'd been Richard's best friend since their youth, but truth be told, I didn't particularly like him. He was loud, selfish, and always seemed to have his own way of doing things, even when it wasn't the best option. I'd never said it to Richard's face, but Jim always rubbed me the wrong way. Yet how could I say no? He was Richard's lifelong friend. "I suppose if it's just for a little while," I said, feeling uneasy but too tired to argue. That was the start of it all. What followed was a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. Jim arrived the very next week, his bags already packed, and a smug smile plastered on his face like he knew he was about to be welcomed with open arms. The first few days were harmless enough, or so I thought. He was polite, helped with little chores around the house, watched TV with Richard in the evenings. But soon things began to change. It started with the little things. Jim would come down to the kitchen for breakfast, asking questions that didn't make sense. Questions that made me feel as though he was slowly taking over the home I'd shared with Richard for decades. He'd comment on the furniture, the layout of the rooms, even the way I cooked dinner. "Eve, don't you think it's time for a change? Maybe a fresh coat of paint in here," Jim said one evening, looking around at the walls as though he were the homeowner. I didn't respond right away, my hands still on the stove as I tried to ignore him. Richard didn't say anything either. He just nodded, agreeing with Jim's suggestions. That was the first time I felt my world shift. I'd never questioned the way we lived, and yet here was Jim, acting like he had every right to rearrange our lives. I chalked it up to him being a guest and tried to brush it off, but the subtle cracks in our home began to widen. As the weeks passed, Jim became more demanding. He'd leave his things around the house, take over Richard's study without asking, and start making himself at home in ways that felt invasive. Richard, for his part, started spending more and more time with Jim, often shutting me out of their conversations. They'd talk about old times, about people I didn't know, things I wasn't a part of anymore. I could hear the laughter and the clinking of whiskey glasses through the walls, as I sat in the living room alone. At first I tried to fill the space with busy work, gardening, reading, even baking, though it felt like I was doing all of it just to keep my mind off the growing unease in my chest. But the longer Jim stayed, the more I realized something was wrong. He wasn't just staying in our home. He was taking over it. I didn't feel like a wife anymore. I felt like a guest in my own life. And it wasn't just the way he was taking over the house. It was the way he treated me, the way he made me feel invisible. The comments about my cooking, my gardening, my health, they all started to wear on me, each little remark chipping away at the woman I thought I was. One evening, I overheard Jim talking to Richard in the kitchen. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. "You know, Richard," Jim said in his usual smug tone, "maybe it's time you thought about putting Eve in a nursing home. She's getting up there in age. You don't want her slowing you down." I stood frozen, my heart dropping to my stomach. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Richard didn't even protest. He just agreed. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My own husband, my life partner, had just agreed to put me away, as though I were some burden he no longer wanted to deal with. I didn't confront him right away. I needed time to think. I needed to figure out what to do with this newfound betrayal. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I may have been older, but I wasn't weak. I still had fire in me. If you're as shocked as I am, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next part of this emotional roller coaster. And hey, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to know who's with me on this journey. The following morning, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The heaviness in my chest had faded, replaced by a quiet, simmering determination. I couldn't let Richard or Jim make decisions for me. I wasn't some old woman ready to be discarded, not yet. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sun barely breaking through the windows, I realized I had two choices. I could let Jim and Richard continue down this path, or I could take control of my own life again. It was time to stop pretending everything was fine. But first I had to confront Richard. He was my husband, after all. We'd spent decades together, building a life, raising our children, surviving countless hardships. I wasn't going to let Jim, his so-called best friend, tear that apart. I waited for Richard to come home from his golf game. Jim, as usual, was already lounging in the living room, sipping his whiskey, watching some sports game on the TV. The sight of him irritated me to my core, but I kept my composure. I walked into the living room, where Jim barely even acknowledged me. "Jim," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I think it's time you leave." His head snapped toward me, confusion written all over his face. "What? You're kicking me out?" he scoffed, raising an eyebrow. Richard didn't say anything about that. I stood tall, the years of being told I was too old to stand up for myself suddenly evaporating. "Yes, Jim. It's time for you to go." At that moment, Richard walked in, looking startled. "What's going on here?" I turned to him, meeting his gaze directly. "Richard, this isn't about Jim anymore. It's about us. I heard what you said last night." His face went pale, and for the first time, he didn't look like the strong man I'd spent my life with. He looked vulnerable. But his silence said everything. He knew I was right. "I can't believe you'd even consider putting me in a nursing home," I continued, my voice trembling with anger but steady with purpose. "I've spent my life with you, Richard. You promised we'd grow old together. Not like this." Jim stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "Eve, this isn't about you," he muttered, trying to brush me off. "I was just looking out for Richard." I spun on him, my eyes flashing. "Don't you dare pretend like this is about me. You've been disrespecting me in my own home, making decisions that aren't yours to make. And now you've crossed the line." Jim took a step back, probably realizing this wasn't going to go as easily as he had hoped. He turned to Richard, who was still standing by the door, looking helpless. "Richard, you've got to do something about this," Jim said, his voice sharp. Richard looked between us, the weight of the situation settling on him. For the first time, I saw him struggle, torn between his loyalty to his old friend and his love for me. But I wasn't going to let him off the hook. Not now. "Richard," I said, my voice softer now but full of hurt, "I need you to make a choice. It's me or Jim. You can't have both. Not like this." Richard's silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the tension thick enough to slice through. And then he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Eve, I never meant for it to go this far." He looked down, his hand shaking slightly. "I'm sorry. I should have never let Jim stay this long." My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a wave of anger and relief wash over me. It wasn't the answer I was hoping for, but it was something. Small victory. "I'm not asking for much, Richard," I said, my voice breaking as I tried to steady my emotions. I just want us to be a team again. I've spent too long pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. And Jim, he has to go. For the first time, Richard nodded. I'll talk to him, he muttered, looking almost defeated. I'll ask him to leave. As he turned to Jim, I couldn't help but feel a slight sense of satisfaction. Maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim my life. But this was far from over. I knew I wasn't done with Jim or Richard. This was just the beginning. And then Jim's smug face twisted into something else, something far darker. You really think you've won? Jim sneered, his voice low and dangerous. This isn't over, Evelyn. Not by a long shot. I froze, the words hanging in the air. There was something about the way he said it, something unsettling. This wasn't just about him leaving. There was more coming, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to be easy. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Jim wasn't the kind of man who took rejection lightly, and Richard, well, he wasn't as strong as I thought. The following days were filled with an unsettling silence. Jim packed his bags, but it wasn't the kind of departure I had imagined. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were plotting something. Each step he took seemed to echo in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't leaving without leaving a mark. Richard, meanwhile, kept his distance. He didn't apologize again, and we didn't talk about what had happened. His awkward silence felt like a wall between us, and I knew it was only a matter of time before we would have to face the fallout. But at least for now, Jim was gone, and that gave me a sense of relief. Or so I thought. It wasn't long before I started seeing signs that things weren't over. I began noticing strange things around the house. The keys to the garage, which I always kept on the kitchen counter, were missing. Richard's phone would ring, but when I answered, the caller would hang up. And every night, I would hear faint noises outside the window, like someone was lurking around. At first, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. It had been a stressful few weeks after all. But then, one morning, I opened the front door to find a letter. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front in hurried handwriting. I ripped it open, my heart pounding. The letter was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. I told you this wasn't over. I know what you're hiding. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows. I stood there, holding the letter in my trembling hands, trying to process what I had just read. I wanted to scream to tell Richard, but I didn't. Couldn't. I wasn't sure if I even trusted him anymore. What did Jim know? What had he found out? I shoved the letter into my pocket and walked inside, the weight of it pressing heavily on my chest. I tried to act normal, but every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye, made me jump. Later that afternoon, Richard came home early. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the walls. Richard, what's going on? I asked, my voice laced with worry. He met my gaze, but there was something guarded in his eyes. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low. Maybe Jim wasn't just here to stay. Maybe he was trying to get something from us. From me. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? I don't know, Richard muttered. But something feels off. I can't shake the feeling that Jim's not gone for good. And I think he was trying to get information. Information on us. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I felt my stomach twist. Jim had always been sneaky, but this was different. What had he found out? And why was he threatening us now? I wanted to tell Richard about the letter, but I didn't. Not yet. I had to think about what to do next, and I needed to be sure of everything before I brought him into it. The last thing I wanted was for Jim to come after us, especially if it meant dragging Richard deeper into whatever mess Jim had created. But then that evening it all came crashing down. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, when I heard the front door creak open. I turned around expecting to see Richard, but instead, there he was. Jim, standing in the doorway with that same smug grin plastered across his face. My heart skipped a beat. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, stepping forward. Jim didn't say a word. He just stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a slow, deliberate motion. "I told you, Evelyn," Jim said, his voice dripping with malice. "This isn't over. I know what you and Richard have been hiding, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." I felt the blood drain from my face. What did he mean by that? What truth? Richard appeared behind me, his face going pale when he saw Jim standing there. "Jim, get out," he said, his voice shaky. But Jim just smiled. "No, Richard. Not yet. You two have a lot to answer for." I stepped between them, my heart racing. "What are you talking about, Jim? You need to leave. Now." But he didn't leave. Instead, Jim pulled out his phone, holding it up to show us something on the screen. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I glanced at the photo, taken from inside our home. The angle was from the hallway, and it was clear that Jim had been watching us. He had been spying on us, collecting evidence of what? I didn't know, but it felt like everything was falling apart. "You think I was just visiting for old times' sake?" Jim laughed bitterly. "No, Evelyn. I was here for a reason. And now, it's time for the world to know exactly what you've been hiding." Could barely breathe. I turned to Richard, my eyes wide with panic. "Richard, what's he talking about? What is he going to do?" Richard shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, Eve. But we have to stop him. Now." As Jim continued to smirk, I felt a surge of determination fill me. I wasn't going to let this man destroy what little peace I had left. I wasn't going to let him win. But what could I do? Before I could think, Jim's phone rang. He answered it without hesitation, his eyes glinting with a twisted satisfaction. "It's done," he said into the phone, his voice low and full of menace. I didn't know what that meant, but I had a feeling it was about to get much worse. The tension in the room was unbearable. Jim's phone call and the chilling way he spoke left me feeling completely exposed. My mind raced with questions. What had he done? What did he mean when he said, "It's done"? I looked at Richard, desperate for answers, but all I saw was a man who was just as lost and confused as I was. Jim's smug grin only seemed to grow wider as he hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "Well, now that that's taken care of," Jim said, his voice thick with satisfaction, "I guess we can talk about how this is going to play out." I had to stop him. I couldn't let him control everything, let alone destroy everything I had left. I took a step forward, my hands trembling with fury. "What exactly do you think you're going to do, Jim?" I asked, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "You're not going to ruin my life. Not after everything I've been through." Jim's expression darkened, and for a moment, I thought I saw something more dangerous than just malice. I saw something calculating, something that made me feel like I had no control over the situation at all. "I'm not going to ruin anything, Evelyn," he said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "You did that all by yourself." I felt my heart sink. "What do you mean by that?" He leaned in, his eyes locking onto mine. "Let's just say, I know all about your little secret." The words hit me like a slap. My head spun as I tried to process what he was implying. What secret? What had he uncovered? I hadn't told anyone about that. Only Richard and I knew. My stomach churned and my mind raced. Could he have found out? Could he know about the money I'd been saving for years? The savings Richard never knew about. Richard was still standing by the door, looking more confused than ever. He didn't know. He couldn't know. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jim," I said, my voice low and almost pleading. "Leave us alone." Jim smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, I think you do know. You've been hiding things from Richard for years, haven't you? Little secrets here and there. Things he never knew about. But don't worry. I'm not here to expose everything. Not yet, anyway." I could feel the ground slipping beneath me. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jim stepped back, hands casually in his pockets. "What I want is simple. You've got something I want, and I'm going to make sure I get it. You don't think I'm going to leave here empty-handed, do you?" Richard finally spoke, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "Jim, whatever you think you're doing, stop. Just stop." But Jim didn't stop. Instead, he turned to Richard, a dark glint in his eye. "I'm sorry, Richard, but you should have listened to me earlier. This is bigger than you think. And now you've got a front row seat to watch everything you thought you had crumble." I couldn't breathe. I could feel the panic rising, but I held on to whatever shred of composure I had left. This wasn't just about Jim. This was about something much bigger. If he knew about the secret I'd kept from Richard for so long, then it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. I had no choice but to act. I couldn't let Jim win. I turned to Richard. "We need to get out of here. Right now. You can't let him do this. Whatever he's planning, we can stop it. We can fix this." Richard looked at me, his face a mixture of confusion and guilt. "Eve, what's going on? What secret are you talking about?" But before I could explain, Jim interrupted. "Oh, you really don't know, do you, Richard? Your lovely wife has been keeping things from you. Things that could ruin your entire life." I turned back to Jim, my voice trembling with fury. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know what it's been like. You're just a man who wants control, who thinks he can play with people's lives. Well, not anymore." Jim stepped forward, his face a mask of anger. "You think you can control this, Evelyn? You think you can fix it? You're not in control anymore." I knew I had to act fast. If I didn't, everything I had worked for, everything I'd built, would be destroyed. But how? What could I do? I had no plan, no backup, no way of knowing what Jim was capable of. Suddenly, I realized what I had to do. It was the only option left. I couldn't let this man keep taking from me, from Richard. I had to stop him once and for all. "Richard," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you need to trust me. We're going to make this right. But you have to help me." He looked at me, confusion still clouding his face. "How?" I didn't answer him immediately. I had to think. I had to act. Jim thought he had all the power, but I was about to show him just how wrong he was. But before I could make my move, Jim spoke again, his tone now cold and threatening. "You really think you're going to get away with this, Evelyn? You think Richard is going to side with you after everything you've kept from him? Think again." And that was when I realized, Jim wasn't just after money. He was after something far worse. He wanted control, power over us both. He wanted to destroy everything. I had no choice now. It was time to take back control, no matter the cost. The days that followed were heavy, filled with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I kept replaying Jim's words in my head, over and over again. "You really think you're going to get away with this?" His voice echoed in my mind like a threat that wouldn't let go. Richard and I hardly spoke, and when we did, it was strained. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he seemed to pull away from me just a little more each day. It was like a wall was slowly building between us, and I couldn't figure out how to break it down. But I wasn't going to let Jim win. I couldn't. I spent the next few nights lying awake, trying to think of a plan, a way to get ahead of Jim before he could do more damage. I knew he wasn't finished with us. He wasn't going to just leave, not after what he'd uncovered. And as much as I hated to admit it, there was something inside of me that knew, Richard had a part in this too. He hadn't stood up for me when it mattered most, and that hurt more than anything Jim could ever do. One evening after dinner, I finally broke the silence. "Richard, we need to talk." He looked at me, his expression weary, but he nodded, sitting down across from me at the table. His face was drawn, his hands clenched on the edge of his chair. "What is it, Eve?" he asked, his voice quiet, guarded. "Richard," I said, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not the enemy here. Jim is. I need you to understand that." Richard's eyes flickered, a brief flash of something I couldn't quite read. "I don't know what you mean. You're both just so tangled up in this mess. What am I supposed to believe, Eve? You've been hiding things from me for years. And now Jim. He's just here and everything's falling apart." I felt the tears welling up, but I held them back. I wouldn't let this destroy me. Not again. "I know," I whispered. "But you have to trust me. We've been through so much together. I love you, Richard. But I can't let Jim tear us apart." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought he might finally understand. But then his voice broke the silence, his words colder than before. "You're right, Eve. You've been hiding things. You've kept secrets from me. And I can't ignore that anymore." His words hit me like a slap. It wasn't just Jim tearing us apart. It was Richard too. He was pulling away, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I stood up, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "If you don't trust me, then maybe we don't have anything left to talk about." I walked out of the room, my heart breaking with every step. It was like I had lost him all over again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just Jim trying to take control. It was Richard, too. The man I'd spent my entire life with. The man who'd promised to love me, even when the years grew long and the days grew short. I didn't know where to turn next. Jim was still out there, waiting for his moment to strike. And now Richard. He was slipping away from me, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. The next morning, Jim showed up at our doorstep again. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after the way he'd threatened us, he had the nerve to show up again. I didn't even know how he knew where we lived. But there he was, standing at the door with a look of quiet satisfaction, as though he'd won. I felt my heart race as I opened the door, my hands gripping the frame tightly. "What are you doing here, Jim?" He smirked. "You know why I'm here, Evelyn. You've been avoiding me. But I think it's time we finish what we started." My pulse quickened as I looked at him. "You're not going to destroy me, Jim. Not this time." He stepped forward, his face inches from mine. "Oh, I think I already have, Evelyn. You just haven't figured it out yet." I was about to slam the door in his face when I heard Richard's voice from behind me. "Jim, get out. Now." Froze. Richard was standing in the doorway, his expression hard and unforgiving. "Richard," Jim said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You really think you can protect her? After everything? Can't. She's already lost." Richard didn't flinch. "I'm not losing her. You need to leave, Jim. And if you don't, I'm calling the police." Jim's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to lash out. But then he stepped back, his lips curling into that same smug grin. "You'll regret this, Richard," he said coldly. "You both will. But don't worry, this isn't over." And just like that he was gone. I closed the door, my hands still trembling, and turned to face Richard. The silence between us felt unbearable, but for the first time in days, I saw something in Richard's eyes. It wasn't guilt or anger. It was resolve. He was finally standing up for me. But was it too little, too late? "Richard," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know how much more I can take." He stepped forward, taking my hand in his. "We'll figure this out, Eve. Promise." We're in this together, okay? I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that we could fix this, that we could beat Jim together. But deep down, I knew the real battle wasn't with Jim. It was with the years of neglect, of secrets, of things left unsaid. And if we were going to survive this, we had to face those things. We had to face the truth. If you think things are about to get better for Evelyn and Richard, you're in for a surprise. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to keep up with this wild emotional ride. Stay tuned. The storm is far from over. The next few days felt like a haze. I tried to settle into the routines that used to bring me comfort, but everything felt off. The house was too quiet, too empty, despite Richard's presence. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, reminding me of everything I had lost and everything I was still fighting for. Richard was doing his best. He was trying to be supportive, trying to rebuild the trust that Jim had torn apart. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. The silence between us was too thick, too suffocating. He'd apologized, but something in me doubted whether he truly understood the weight of what had happened. I woke up early one morning, feeling restless. Richard had already gone out to run errands, and the house felt particularly empty. I walked through the rooms, my eyes lingering on the places where we used to sit together, laugh together, and talk about everything and nothing at all. The ghost of those memories lingered in the air, and I couldn't help but wonder if we'd ever return to that. As I walked past the kitchen, I noticed something on the counter. Letter. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. The letter was familiar. Jim's handwriting. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I picked it up, my hands shaking. It wasn't just any letter. This one was addressed to both Richard and me. I opened it slowly, bracing myself for whatever was to come. You thought I'd go away that easily. I'm just getting started. Richard, you may think you've got the upper hand, but you don't know everything. I know things about your wife that could destroy you. If you think she's innocent in all of this, you're wrong. I've got the proof. I stopped reading, my heart thudding in my chest. I could barely process the words. What was Jim talking about? What had he uncovered? I'd kept a lot of things to myself, but I didn't think there was anything that could destroy our marriage. But Jim had never been one to make empty threats. This wasn't just a bluff. It wasn't. I felt my pulse quicken as I read the rest. I'll be in touch. Don't make me expose the truth. The letter was signed off with nothing but a single word. Soon. I stood there stunned. My hands clenched around the paper as I stared at it, trying to make sense of it all. Jim wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to just fade into the background. He was determined to ruin everything I had left. I couldn't let that happen. I had to stop him. But how? I turned the letter over, almost in a daze, trying to think. There had to be something I could do. I couldn't let Richard know what Jim was threatening. Not yet. He had enough on his plate, trying to rebuild the trust between us. But there was no more time to wait. I had to act now. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I would find out what Jim knew, what he thought he had on me, and I would make sure he couldn't use it against me. I spent the next few hours on the phone, calling a private investigator. I needed someone who could find the truth, someone who could uncover whatever Jim thought he knew. When I hung up, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Jim wasn't just going to walk away. He had too much pride, too much of a vendetta. But I wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. I had lived through too much to let one man destroy everything. As night fell, I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, deep in thought. Richard had come home late, but we didn't talk much. I could feel the distance between us again, the silent wall Jim had put between us. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to face him. I had to confront Richard with the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He had a right to know. And I couldn't protect him from this any longer. The next morning after breakfast, I took a deep breath and walked into the living room where Richard was reading the newspaper. He looked up as I approached, his eyes weary but kind. "Richard," I said, my voice steady but full of the emotion I'd been holding back for days. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Richard set the newspaper down, his brow furrowed in concern. "What is it, Eve?" I took another deep breath. "It's about Jim. He doesn't know the whole truth. But I do." Richard's eyes narrowed, confusion mixing with a hint of fear. "What are you talking about?" I never wanted you to know this. But Jim has been using it against me. And now he's threatening to use it against you too." I paused, my throat tight as I tried to find the right words. "There's money. Money I've been saving for years, Richard. Money that Jim knows about. Money that—" Richard's face paled, his mouth going dry. "You've been hiding money from me?" I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I didn't want to, Richard. But after everything, after all these years, I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want you to see me as weak. I wanted to have something for myself. Something I could use if I ever needed it." Richard's expression softened, but the hurt was still there. "Eve, we promised no secrets. We promised each other that we would always be open. I don't know how to process this." "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never meant for it to come to this." There was a long silence between us as Richard stood up, pacing the room. I watched him, my heart in my throat, not knowing if he would understand or if this would be the final straw. "I don't know what to think right now," Richard said quietly. "But I'll be damned if I let Jim use this against us. We need to fight back, Eve. Together." I looked at him, my heart swelling with relief. Finally, a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could get through this after all. But Jim's shadow still loomed over us. He wouldn't stop. Not until everything was destroyed. And now we had to face him head-on. The days that followed felt like an endless spiral. Richard and I barely spoke beyond the necessary. The truth I'd revealed to him about the money hung between us like a heavy fog. I could see the doubt in his eyes, but there was also a glimmer of determination, a recognition that we had to fight together, or we'd lose everything. But despite that, I could feel him slipping away, piece by piece. The more Jim's shadow loomed over us, the more Richard withdrew into himself. He was processing everything, but I couldn't help but wonder if he still blamed me for keeping this secret from him. I spent my days preparing for the worst, trying to gather as much information as I could. I'd hired the private investigator, but the answers I was getting were frustratingly slow. I needed something solid, something that would put an end to this nightmare. But Jim, it seemed, was always one step ahead. Then, on a particularly cold morning, I received a call from the investigator. My heart skipped as I picked up the phone. "Mrs. Johnson," the investigator said, his voice calm but serious. "I have something for you. It's about Jim." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What is it? What do you know?" "He's been in and out of your bank accounts," the investigator continued. "But there's more. He's been using your information to buy assets in your name. It looks like he's planning something big." I felt a rush of panic. "What do you mean, something big?" "It's hard to say for certain, but it looks like he's trying to take control of your finances, possibly even your home. He's been getting very close to your accounts, and I don't think he's planning to let this go without a fight." My stomach twisted. Jim was playing a dangerous game. He wasn't just threatening to expose our secrets. He was trying to take everything I had worked for. "Do you have anything concrete?" I asked, my voice trembling. The investigator paused before speaking. "There's a series of transactions I need to show you. They're all in your name, but I don't believe you authorized them." My mind raced. The last thing I wanted was for Jim to steal everything I had left. This wasn't just about the money, it was about control. He wanted to break me, strip away my dignity, my sense of security. And I couldn't let him. "I'll need those documents and fast," I said. "Thank you." I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. Richard wasn't going to like this. He already felt betrayed by the secret I'd kept, and now I was about to drop another bombshell on him. I had no idea how he would react. But it didn't matter. I had to act fast. That afternoon, after Richard came home from his walk, I sat him down in the living room. The tension was thick in the air, and I could see the familiar lines of worry etched into his face. He didn't know about the investigator's findings yet, and I could tell he was already bracing for another confrontation. "Richard," I began softly, "there's something else you need to know." He looked at me, his face guarded. "What is it, Eve?" "I hired a private investigator," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And Jim's been using my information. He's been buying things in my name, manipulating my accounts. He's planning something, and it's bigger than we thought." Richard stared at me, his expression unreadable. "What?" he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "He's been doing what?" I took a deep breath. "I've been trying to protect us, but Jim is playing a dangerous game. He's trying to take everything. Our finances, our home. Everything we've built." I watched as Richard processed the words, his face slowly falling into a mix of disbelief and anger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I couldn't," I whispered. "I didn't want to drag you into this. I thought I could handle it. But I knew now that I couldn't handle it alone. The damage was already done. Jim had already dug his claws into our lives, and there was no way out unless we fought back." Richard stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know what to think anymore, Eve. I feel like I've been living in a lie. First the money, now this." I could feel the hurt in his words, but I couldn't stop. "Richard, I never meant for any of this to happen. But I need you. We need to stick together now. Jim isn't going to stop until he's destroyed everything." Richard's face softened, but the pain in his eyes remained. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Eve. You've kept so much from me." I reached out, my hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Richard. I should have told you. I should have trusted you. But I never wanted to lose you." He didn't respond right away. He looked down, his brow furrowed in thought. I could see the battle playing out inside him. He wanted to believe in me, but the weight of everything I'd kept from him was too much. The trust we had built over the years was shattered, and I couldn't fix it in an instant. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "We're in this together, Eve. But you have to understand. You've hurt me. This isn't just about Jim anymore. It's about us. We need to rebuild that trust." I nodded, the tears I'd been holding back finally breaking free. "I know. And I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild it. We were in this mess together. But whether or not we could overcome the damage Jim had caused was still uncertain. Jim hadn't just taken our finances. He had taken our peace, our trust. And now we had to fight for it back." The next few days were tense. The investigator had sent over the documents, and we could see the full scope of Jim's plan. He had been buying property under my name, transferring funds, manipulating everything he could to make us vulnerable. The worst part was he wasn't done. Jim was preparing for his final move. "I don't know how we stop him," Richard said one night after going through the documents with me. "But we have to do something before he takes everything." I took a deep breath, determination flooding my veins. "We will, Richard. We'll fight back. We won't let him win." But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Jim's game had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. We were about to enter the fight of our lives. The days that followed were a blur of frantic planning, hidden phone calls and sleepless nights. Richard and I, though still reeling from the shock of Jim's betrayal, were now in full-on survival mode. We had to outsmart him. No more secrets, no more waiting for something to happen. Jim was coming after us, and we had to be ready. We spent hours going through the files from the private investigator, looking for anything that might give us leverage. But with each page we turned, the reality of the situation hit harder. Jim wasn't just an old friend trying to settle old scores. He was a man who knew how to play the game. And he wasn't going to let anything stop him. One night, as Richard sat at the kitchen table, his eyes glued to the screen, I found myself staring at the window, lost in thought. The same quiet house, the same empty silence. It felt like we were just waiting for a storm that we knew would eventually come. Richard looked up from the documents, his face pale. "Eve, this is bad. Jim's already transferred half of the assets. Rest. I don't know how much time we have." My heart sank. How do we stop him? Richard shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "I don't know. He's a step ahead of us at every turn. It's like he planned this from the beginning." There was a long pause as I took in his words. Jim had always been crafty, but this felt like something more. Jim wasn't just after money. He was after control. After everything. I had to be stronger. I couldn't let Jim break us. Not now. The next day, Richard and I went to the bank. We needed to take action, something to stop Jim from taking full control. I could see the tension in Richard's face as we waited for the bank manager to meet with us. His hands were clenched, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson," the bank manager said, "but we can't freeze any accounts without proper documentation. Seems like your name is already associated with these transactions. We'll need to get legal involved." I felt the weight of those words. Legal involved. That meant a long, drawn-out battle. It meant bringing everything out into the open. The secrets I had worked so hard to protect, secrets that could destroy everything, would come to light. "I understand," I said, trying to mask the fear in my voice. "We'll get the necessary documents. But please do what you can." The manager nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. This wasn't just a simple case of fraud. Jim had covered his tracks well. As we left the bank, Richard was quiet, lost in his own thoughts. I didn't blame him. I was lost in mine too. We were up against a man who had been waiting for this moment for years. And now, he was coming for everything we had left. That evening, Richard and I had a conversation that I had been putting off for too long. We needed to make a decision, together. Whether we wanted to continue fighting, or if we'd let Jim win. "Eve," Richard said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "I know we've been through a lot, but I need to ask you something. Do you think we can survive this? Do you think we can fix what's been broken?" I looked at him, my heart aching. "I don't know, Richard. But I know we have to try. For everything we've built." We sat there in silence, each of us lost in the weight of those words. It was a turning point. No longer just a fight for our finances, but a fight for the life we'd shared for so long. Jim might have tried to tear us apart, but if we didn't fight for each other, then Jim had already won. The next few days were a whirlwind. We met with lawyers, made calls to the bank, and filed for an injunction to freeze Jim's access to the assets. But it was clear. Jim wasn't going down without a fight. We would have to face him head-on. And then the final blow came. It was a cold afternoon when Jim showed up at our door again. His face more menacing than I had ever seen it. He didn't even knock. He just opened the door and walked right in. His eyes gleaming with a dangerous kind of satisfaction. "I told you it wasn't over," Jim said, his voice low and steady. "And now, I'm going to make sure you both pay for what you've done." I stood frozen, my blood running cold. Richard was behind me, his fists clenched, ready to confront him. But Jim wasn't done. He wasn't just here to threaten us. He had come to deliver the final blow. "I've already sold everything, Evelyn," he said, his grin widening. "It's too late to stop me now." I felt the ground slip beneath me. My stomach turned as the reality hit. Jim had won. He had taken everything, everything we had worked for, everything we had built together. It was gone. But then, just as I was about to crumble, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. Not without a fight. "You think it's over," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "It's not. I'm not going down without a fight, Jim." He chuckled, clearly enjoying the power he had over us. "You think you can still stop me? You're already too late." I took a step forward, my heart pounding. "No, we're not too late. You think you have everything. You're wrong. Because you don't have the one thing that matters." Jim's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Me," I said quietly, but with conviction. "I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." There was a moment of silence. Then a sharp, taunting laugh escaped Jim's lips. "You really think you can win? You're out of your league, Evelyn." But I wasn't done. "We'll see, Jim. You haven't won yet." I could feel Richard's presence behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I knew we were in this together. Jim might have thought he had us cornered, but we still had one thing left: our will to fight. The final showdown was approaching, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I was ready. Ready to do whatever it took to protect the life I'd fought for. Jim had underestimated me, and that would be his mistake. The battle wasn't over. And in the end, Jim would learn just how wrong he was. The next few days felt like a waiting game. Jim was quiet after our confrontation, but the tension in the house was unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every phone call that came in made me jump. We were both on edge, constantly anticipating his next move. Richard and I spent hours in the lawyer's office, working out the legal framework for our defense. It wasn't going to be easy. Jim had made sure of that. He had covered his tracks well, and his web of deceit stretched far. But there was one thing Jim had underestimated: my resilience. And now, with Richard by my side, we were ready to take back control. But then, just when I thought I might be able to breathe, the phone call came. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, when the landline rang. I didn't even need to check the caller ID to know it was him. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I picked up the receiver. "Evelyn," Jim's voice crackled through the phone, as cold and menacing as ever. "I gave you a chance to walk away. But you're making a huge mistake." I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear, my pulse quickening. "What do you want, Jim?" "I want everything you've been hiding. And this time, I'm not giving you an option to say no." He paused, the silence hanging between us like a weight. "You have until tomorrow to hand over everything you've been keeping from me. Or I'll make sure Richard knows exactly what you've done." My blood ran cold. The threat wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about everything. About everything I had kept hidden for so long. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how he knew. How much did Jim know? What had he uncovered? "I'm not giving you anything," I said, my voice steady but tinged with fear. "You can't blackmail me anymore, Jim. I won't let you." "Oh, but you don't have a choice, Evelyn. The moment you decided to hide from me, you gave me the power. And now you'll pay for it." He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my hand shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. Richard had been in the living room, but I hadn't been able to speak to him. I couldn't let him see how terrified I was. He was already stressed enough. But now things were getting darker, and I knew we were running out of time. The following morning I told Richard everything. The phone call, the threats, the weight of everything Jim had been holding over us. His face went pale as I spoke. His fists clenched in anger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Why keep this from me, Eve? I was trying to protect you," I whispered, my eyes filled with tears. I didn't want you to have to face this. I didn't want to drag you into the mess Jim has created. Richard was silent for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally he stood up, walking over to the window. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the betrayal, the confusion. I should have known, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I should have been there, Eve. I should have noticed what Jim was doing. I stood up, my heart breaking as I watched him. Richard, this isn't your fault. Jim manipulated both of us. He's been playing us like pawns in his game. But we have to fight back. We can't let him win. Richard turned to face me, his jaw set in determination. We will fight. Promise you we'll fight back. We're not going to let Jim destroy us. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in days I could see a way forward. We would face this together. Jim may have thought he had us cornered, but he was about to find out how wrong he was. But then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. Jim? Richard asked, his voice low. I shook my head, the sense of dread growing heavier with each passing second. I didn't know who it was, but I had a bad feeling. Richard opened the door slowly, and I stood frozen, waiting for the worst. But it wasn't Jim. It was a sheriff's deputy. Are you Evelyn Johnson? The deputy asked, his voice serious but not unfriendly. Yes, I answered, my voice shaking slightly. I have a summons here for you, he said, handing me a piece of paper. It's from Jim Dawson. He's filed a lawsuit against you for fraud and embezzlement. I felt the ground slip beneath me as I took the papers from his hand. My stomach churned. The letter was formal, official, and it confirmed everything Jim had been threatening. He had gone to the authorities. He had filed a lawsuit. The walls were closing in. Jim can't do this, I whispered, my mind racing. This isn't just about the money anymore. He's trying to ruin me, ruin us. The deputy gave me a sympathetic look. I'm just delivering the paperwork. You'll have to contact your lawyer to respond. As the deputy left, Richard and I stood in stunned silence. I could feel the fear creeping back in, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about saving our finances. It was about clearing my name, about stopping Jim from tearing apart the life we had left. We'll fight this, Richard said, his voice firm. We'll fight for our lives, for our future. And we won't let Jim win. And for the first time in weeks, I finally believed him. The battle was about to escalate, and we weren't backing down. The following week felt like a whirlwind. The shock of the lawsuit hit us hard, but now we were forced to move quickly. The legal battle was starting, and it wasn't just about saving our home or our finances. It was about my dignity. Jim had thrown the first punch, and now it was our turn to fight back. We met with our lawyer, a sharp woman named Carla, who immediately went to work on defending us. She was confident and methodical, but I could see the weight of the situation on her face. The evidence Jim had gathered was strong. Too strong, it seemed. The documents, the transactions, the lies. It was all coming together in a way that painted a picture of guilt. A picture I couldn't allow. I don't want to sugarcoat this, Carla said, as we sat in her office, papers spread out in front of us. Jim has a good case. We're up against a lot of firepower here. Richard's hands were tightly clenched as he sat beside me. I could feel his anxiety growing with each passing second. I was feeling it too, the weight of everything that had been hidden for so long. But I wasn't going to let Jim win. Not like this. We need to dig deeper, I said, my voice steady but full of resolve. Jim thinks he has us cornered, but he's wrong. Carla raised an eyebrow, looking between Richard and me. What do you mean? I've been thinking, I said slowly. What if Jim has been hiding something of his own? Something he doesn't want anyone to find out. Carla leaned back in her chair, considering my words. You think Jim has something to hide? Of course he does, I replied, my mind racing. Jim has always been sneaky, always too clever for his own good. What if we flip this? What if we find something that proves he's been manipulating things? Carla nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. That's a good angle. But we need proof. Without evidence, it'll be hard to convince anyone. I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose settle over me. I had no idea what Jim was hiding, but I was certain that he was hiding something. He wouldn't have gone to such lengths if there wasn't something buried deep in the shadows. We just had to find it. For the next few days, Richard and I scoured every document we had, every account, every transaction. We went through boxes of old paperwork, trying to find something that would give us a lead. But the more we searched, the more frustrated I became. It felt like Jim had thought of everything, leaving no stone unturned. One night, as I was going through some old files in the attic, I stumbled upon a folder I hadn't seen before. It was tucked behind some old bank statements, wedged between two dusty boxes. The folder was thick, and the label was faded. I opened it, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pages. And then I saw it. There, buried in the middle of the papers, was a transaction I didn't recognize. It was a large transfer, one that Jim had made a year ago. The account it was transferred to wasn't his. It wasn't mine either. But the name on the account, it was one I knew all too well. It was the name of one of Jim's business partners, someone who had disappeared from his life years ago after a falling out. But now it made sense. Jim had been using this hidden account, a way to funnel money without anyone noticing. I felt my heart race as I pulled out my phone, taking a photo of the pages. This was the breakthrough we needed. Jim hadn't just been hiding money from me. He had been hiding it from everyone. The next morning I called Carla. I found something, I said, my voice barely containing my excitement. Jim has a secret account. It's tied to one of his former business partners. Carla was quiet for a moment, processing the information. This could be huge, she said finally. If we can prove that he's been hiding money in this account, it could turn the tide in our favor. But we need to move fast. I felt a sense of hope for the first time in days. We had something. We had a lead, and it was a good one. Jim had been hiding his tracks, but he had made one mistake. And we were going to make sure he paid for it. Over the next few days, we worked with Carla to build a case around the hidden account. We contacted the bank, requesting all records related to the transaction. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, the evidence we gathered made Jim's case look weaker and weaker. Then one afternoon we got a call from Carla. "We've got him," she said, her voice full of triumph. "The bank has confirmed that the account is linked to Jim. We've got all the proof we need." I could hardly believe it. After everything Jim had put us through, after the lies and the threats, we were finally going to get our chance to fight back. Jim's web of deceit was crumbling, and we were the ones holding the pieces. The next day we went to court. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as we sat down at the defendant's table, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Jim was sitting on the other side, his smug expression still intact, as if he knew everything would go his way. But today was different. Today we had the upper hand. As the judge called the case, I could feel my nerves tighten. But then, when Carla presented the evidence, it felt like everything shifted. The papers we had gathered, the hidden accounts, the secret transactions, it all came to light. Jim's face went pale as the reality of his actions hit him. "Your Honor," Carla said, "the evidence here shows that Mr. Dawson has been involved in financial fraud, hiding assets under false names, and attempting to manipulate the defendant's financial situation." The judge looked at Jim, who seemed to shrink under the weight of the evidence. Jim opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His once confident demeanor had completely shattered. I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory as I watched Jim finally lose the battle. The game was over. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated us. But even as the judge ordered Jim to return the stolen assets and pay restitution, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something bigger. Jim might have lost this battle, but his defeat was a symbol of something much more powerful: the strength of standing up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. I turned to Richard, who was smiling at me with tears in his eyes. We had made it. Together. And as we walked out of that courtroom, I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it together. Because together we could survive anything. If you've been following Evelyn and Richard's journey, thank you so much. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.